Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone joining this panel today. My name is Kiana Williamson. I'm editor for the Sacramento Bee's Equity Lab. Like this conversation, our mission at the lab is to empower you, our readers, with representative and solutions-focused journalism. Sacramento is poised to be a city where everyone can be treated with dignity, where everyone has equitable access to opportunity, and where all voices are heard and considered. Today, you'll hear from newly elected Sacramento City Council members and understand their priorities for both their districts and the city. You'll hear from community leaders, advocates, folks with boots on the ground on the work that should be happening to make our city a more just place to live for all. The work we do here at the Equity Lab is to serve you, our readers. It's to keep you aware, but more importantly, to keep you engaged. We survive solely on funding from you and our community partners. You can make your tax-deductible donation to the Sacramento Bee Equity Lab Fund in partnership with the local media foundation at givebutter.com/the Sacramento Bee. We're calling this panel Views and Voices Town Hall, a new direction for Sacramento leadership. I know that many people are working from home and watching this panel. So if you have other work to do and you just want to listen in, we really appreciate you for joining us today. A couple of housekeeping notes. If we have time, we'll answer questions from the comments, so please use the Facebook comments and we'll try to answer them if we have time. We should also note that this live panel is being recorded and we will make the replay available on the SacBee website, sacbee.com. We'll add it to tomorrow's newsletter as well as in social on the SacBee Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages. I do want to thank everyone for joining us. There were so many of you who registered to join this call, and we look forward to talking and speaking with all of you. I'd like to introduce you one of our best and brightest reporters, Teresa Clift.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our panel discussion today. Come December 15th, the Sacramento City Council will look very different than it does today. 3 new members will be virtually sworn in. This March, for the first time in a decade, a city council member was defeated by a challenger. That happened when activist and environmental lobbyist Katie Valenzuela defeated Steve Hansen for the District 4 seat representing Midtown, Downtown, and Land Park. Then it happened again. In November, grocery store owner Sean Loloee defeated Alan Warren for the District 2 seat covering North Sacramento. In District 8, South Sacramento, Mai Vang will replace retiring council member Larry Carr, becoming the first Asian American woman to be elected to the council. Katie, Mai, and Sean, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In addition to the high turnover on council, this year's election was significant from an equity perspective as well. D4 is home to many residents suffering from homelessness, while D2 and D8 are home to some of the most historically disadvantaged neighborhoods in the city, Del Paso Heights and Meadowview. The 3 of you knocked on thousands of doors this year in campaigning for your city council seats. I'm sure you heard a lot of different concerns that folks would like to see addressed at the local level. I'd love if you could share with the viewers about what you heard and how it's formed your priorities as you prepare to be sworn in. Along these lines, Annette in Land Park asks, what do you see as the top priority for the city? Katie, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me. Absolutely, the number one thing on the residents of District 4's mind is homelessness. As you mentioned, we're arguably the epicenter of the crisis. We're seeing a lot of camping, a lot of death, unfortunately, a lot of assaults, and just a lot of suffering on the streets that's gone unaddressed for far too long. So overwhelmingly, my top priority is trying to tackle that by creating a plan with stakeholders in the district that we can push together with, both at the council as well as at the county and at other levels of government, so we can try to make a move on that. But I would say the second biggest priority for me, in addition to making sure community voices are brought into City Hall, because folks want to be heard, overwhelmingly people just want to be heard, they want to be engaged, is going to be the budget. That's going to be our first big opportunity to bring the community in and really engage in a participatory process for determining our budget priorities to make sure it reflects what we need coming out of this crisis.
All right, great. And we'll talk a little bit more about the budget a little later on in the panel. Mai, let's go to you. What do you see as the top priority for the city, especially for the residents of your district in Meadowview and Parkway?
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa. And I just also want to thank Equity Lab and Sacramento Bee for having this town hall. When I was on the campaign trail, what I heard first and foremost is really around equity and racial justice, right? So that is definitely one of my priorities. But I have to say, in addition to that, COVID recovery is one of the top priorities. I think we all know very well that COVID doesn't discriminate, but the system that we have does. And what that ends up happening is that, communities who are hit don't have access to those resources. And so making sure that we are super laser focused on ensuring that policy decision and investment has to protect, provide support for residents in neighborhoods most hardest hit by COVID. The other piece that I mentioned earlier is the equity piece and racial justice, especially in a district like District 8 that's incredibly diverse, 30% Latinos, 28% Asian American, Pacific Islanders, 22% Black and white. Our communities is incredibly diverse, but we know that there are a lot of struggles. And I know as a community organizer and now as your councilwoman-elect is that, when we fight and tend to the communities most hardest hit, then everyone else does better. And so racial justice and equity will be one of my top priorities.
Okay, thanks, Mai. And now, Sean, we'll move to you. What do you see as a top priority for the city, especially for your district, North Sacramento and Del Paso Heights?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for creating such a wonderful platform. My experience has been, the homelessness as being as the top #1 priority within District 2. Youth and the budget planning as the top 3 concerns for District 2.
All right. And several of you mentioned homelessness. So I want to shift to diving in a little bit deeper on that topic. I know it's a big one right now. The homeless crisis continues to be a major concern in Sacramento, especially during the coronavirus. A lot of those folks are very vulnerable. With the help of the state, there are 2 hotels open in the city right now sheltering people, but it's unclear how long they'll be able to stay. Sean, in your district, a hotel in Woodlake recently closed that was sheltering folks under Project Roomkey. And Katie, in your district, the Capitol Park Hotel shelter recently closed as well. They were able to permanently house folks, but those shelters have closed. And the city has recently opened a shelter in Meadowview for 50 women. Mai, that's your district. And the city is opening another shelter under the WX Freeway for 50 adults this summer. But there are an estimated 5,500 homeless people in the county at last count on any given night. Most of them are sleeping outdoors and in the city. What do you think the city should do to address the homelessness and affordable housing crisis? Sean, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, thank you. And it is a major crisis, actually, statewide. If I'm not mistaken, the last data that I looked at, the state of California has approximately 150,000 individuals that are homeless. And that's a very big topic in District 2. But we have to also look at and see kind of what's causing this. We need the data to kind of avoid individuals or see what we can do to avoid individuals becoming homeless. Right now, when you look at the homeless population, you have pretty much in 3 different brackets. You have individuals that have become homeless due to economic reasons, mental illness, and substance abuse. And this quick fixes and just throwing some money on this issue is obviously it's not working. And we're seeing cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco that it's been absolute disaster with the plans that they have implemented. We have to kind of think out of the box. We have to be a little bit bold on making decisions that actually work. We have to create an open line communication with the county and try to see if we can utilize some of the existing facilities that we have as shelters or permanent housing. But bottom line of it is that we have to, the delays that, the amount of red tapes that exists within our city or some of the other cities within California, those are the things that we need to kind of bypass or get rid of so we can get things done faster. We have to, what we have to do to avoid people from becoming homeless is, that's the question that myself and I have a few very experienced individuals that we're putting our minds together and see what some of the issues are out there. But it's definitely it's a huge concern of mine, and I'm working diligently with a team of experts, try to come with solutions and proposals that, one, it would minimize individuals becoming homeless. So we have to look at that data, see what's really the grassroots cause of this, and also help the individuals that are out there and need immediate assistance.
All right, thanks, Sean. Mai, we'll go to you. What do you think are a couple of things that the city should do to address homelessness most urgently?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Teresa, for your question. I think absolutely, on any given night, there is about 5,500 of our neighbors who are unhoused on the streets. And, what really needs to happen is making sure we have a multi-tiered, multifaceted, solution, because homelessness, when we think about it, it's not just a one box fits all, right? There is this spectrum of folks who are living in their cars, to college students who are homeless, to families who are one paycheck away from making rent. And so I think it's going to be really important to have a multi-tier approach to address homelessness in the city of Sacramento. I think, I've heard this on the campaign trail. I've heard this from a community expert, but that we got to make sure that we have more housing options, right? That includes temporary, supportive, and transitional housing. And while we can talk a lot about homelessness right now, I think it's also important to acknowledge that you can't talk about homelessness without talking about affordable housing and making sure that we have renter protections, right? We need to do more to preserve the affordable housing that we have, protected, and produce more of it. And so I don't think that when we talk about homelessness, it's a subject or a topic alone by itself, but we also have to address affordable housing as well, because we have families, especially in District 8, that's one paycheck away from making rent, especially in District 8, where 50% of our residents are homeowners and the other 50% are renters. And so that is going to be one of my top priorities as well. We do have the Meadowview shelter in the heart of Meadowview in South Sacramento. We have to make sure to pull up our sleeve to make sure that that's successful as well. I am inquiring about the data. I think in the last community conversation that I was part of, the data wasn't available in terms of the racial ethnic breakdown, right? And so we have to make sure that we're intentional about what we're doing. And so as Councilwoman, I plan to do that, and being laser focused on the racial and equity piece, because we also know when we talk about homelessness, most of the time it's our Black or brown and our folks of color that's bearing the brunt of the devastating effects.
That's right. And Katie, we'll move to you. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this topic. Downtown and Midtown is perhaps where the homeless crisis is most visible right now. What are your thoughts on what the city needs to do to address it?
Yes, and hopefully you can hear me. I just had 2 leaf blowers start up outside of my window, which, if I could argue another call I get quite frequently, especially in the central city and Land Park, is like, oh my gosh, the leaf blower noise. So hopefully you can hear me. I understand this complaint. The homelessness crisis, as I often talk about in terms of like short, long term, right? Like short term, we need to figure out how to triage the situation. How do we keep people in the housing they have now? Over 4,000 people applied for the $4 million in emergency rent assistance fund, which is about 4 times as many people as that fund is going to be able to support. So we need to figure out how to keep people in their housing, how to help the people who are on the street right now stabilize. I'm a big proponent of the short-term camping and parking, having small sites set up where we can have bathrooms and trash and just keep people safe. Something else that's happening with our LGBTQ population, our women, is a lot of assaults, a lot of really dangerous situations that are occurring, and we need to just stabilize stabilize things, give people a place they can go right now, so that we have the support and services and can get our arms a little bit around the crisis. The point in time count says 5,500, but I mean, best estimates from service providers are closer to 10,000. So we need to get our arms around the crisis, figure out who's who, what's what do people need, how many folks need mental health services, how many folks need drug services, how many folks just need a leg up and some job assistance and case management, so we can start moving people through pipelines of services into housing. But as Councilwoman Vang just said, the housing is the big question mark. I mean, there aren't a lot of places for folks to go. A lot of folks are going in and out of service providers because there isn't a permanent spot that will accept a Section 8 voucher or is affordable for someone who's getting SSI or disability benefits. So we need to find a way to build more of those units, and that's another huge problem that we're going to have to tackle. But as you saw in the SACB just this Sunday, an article I wrote talking about convening a task force in the district, similar to Councilman Loloee, having experts come together with service providers, with business districts, with neighborhood associations, so we can work together. Because this isn't just something for the city. This is going to involve the county. It's going to involve SAC Steps Forward and just a whole range of folks. And we should be working together and pushing in the same direction.
All right. Yeah, and you make a good point there. That 5,500 number is the estimate for on any given night how many folks in the county are experiencing homelessness. But throughout the course of the year, you're right, it's probably closer to 10,000 that study found. So let's shift now to youth. Like many cities, Sacramento has seen a surge in youth gun violence since the start of the pandemic. On Black Friday, 2 teenage brothers were killed in a tragic shooting at the Art and Fair Mall. In October, a 9-year-old little girl was killed in a drive-by shooting in Mama Mark's Park in broad daylight. The Measure U sales tax increase voters approved in 2018 has funded some new youth programs, such as pop-up activity nights for teens. But when COVID hit, the city diverted some Measure U money to core city services to fill the budget hole. They then used some of the $89 million coronavirus stimulus money from the federal government for youth initiatives, things like mental health services and funding for the Black Child Legacy campaign. But all of that money has to be spent by the end of the year, and it's unclear if Congress will approve another round. Jose of Pocket Greenhaven writes, youth development programs have been overlooked by City Council. Given the challenge of online learning for kids and families, what ideas do you have for re-engaging with youth programs? And this is me adding a little to Jose's question here. Given the major hit that the pandemic has caused to the city budget, where do you propose the money comes from for those new youth initiatives? Katie, we'll start with you on this one.
Thank you, Teresa. And yeah, this is something that's been reaffirmed across the county as the People's Budget Project here in Sacramento has done a survey of over 4,000 residents predominantly living in the city. And overwhelmingly, what they want is more funding, more support services for youth and communities, more of the prevention that can help intervene and keep those sort of violent instances from happening by supporting youth and providing resources and alternatives and just general community support. So this is something that is a huge priority for me, especially as we come out of this pandemic, because we know the budget will be tight. We need to make sure we're supporting the community, we're supporting the youth, we're supporting the folks who are going to need our help for a while as they try to get their feet back under them and come out of this hopefully better than we were before. So I really do agree with the question, the premise of the question, which is that we can and should be doing a lot more. But budgets are not unlimited. They don't grow just because we have more needs. And so, really looking at where our current spending is going. One thing that I have been very vocal about is I think, we spend a lot of money on law enforcement response after something bad happens. And I'd really like to see us redirect some of that money to try to help prevent the need for law enforcement to happen. As my friend, Dr. Kofer likes to say, I'd much rather not be shot and have to call the cops. I'd much rather invest in the programs that will make it so that I don't have to call 911. Because by the time you call 911, several things have happened wrong in a community setting that could have been prevented with early intervention and more investments. So that's my proposal that I'm hoping to work through with the community in this next budget.
All right. And Mai, let's turn it over to you here. What are your ideas for funding new youth programs, and where should that money come from?
Yeah, so let me just start by first saying and acknowledging that we have many community-based organizations on the front line doing work with young people every single day, right? They know, they are the eyes and ears on the ground, and I lean in on them when they let me know in terms of what resources our youth needs. Council member Katie Valenzuela mentioned it earlier regarding the budget. I think we have to be smarter in how we leverage funding, not just as a city, but also from school district, right? I will be, representing a district that has two school districts, Sac City Unified School District and Elk Grove. And, our students aren't just Elk Grove and Sac City Unified School District students, right? These kids are also part of the city. They're also part of the county, and it's a collective responsibility, right? It's a shared responsibility in terms of how we fund youth programming in this region. And I think that needs to be a larger conversation about how we plan to have steady revenues. I was supportive of the measure, the Kids First Coalition, that pushed to get that, to make sure that a percentage of our budget was for youth funding, right? Because when you don't have something institutionalized, you won't see the funding coming to our young people. And so we have to be intentional about that. And especially right now, especially on, sitting on the school board, right? I, speak to parents and our young folks every day about just the challenges with distant learning and the social, emotional, mental health, right? Oftentimes folks go to the city to share their concerns, which is great. But we also have a county jurisdiction that oversees health, right? And so these partnerships are so absolutely critical. So when we're talking about mental health for our young folks and services, we also have to call in our county partners to make sure that they step up to the plate as well. And so it needs to be a collective responsibility. When I looked at the audit and the report, our city, I know that in particular in District A, we're a very young population, right? And in the city in particular, 35, I think it's the medium or average age. That means our community is very young, and if we don't make young folks a priority, then we're going to leave them behind, right? And so, there's always a lot of talk about supporting young people, supporting our youth, but it's time that we actually step up and make it a budget priority.
All right, thanks for that, Mai. That's really interesting data there. Hadn't heard that before. Sean, let's move to you here. What are your thoughts on new youth initiatives, and where should that money come from in the city budget at a time when the city budget's taking a hit from coronavirus?
Sure. First of all, I am so excited that so far from the last 2 or 3 questions, it seems like the newly elect council members, we're all agreeing on what the problem is and how we should approach it. So this is a very great sign that we can get things done. But I'm extremely passionate about the youth and harnessing their capabilities, what they're capable of doing. Ultimately, it's my children, your children, the children's children that at some point are responsible for leading our communities. So it only makes sense, especially within our district, to make sure that some of the basic necessities are met off the bat, and that's education, food, and shelter. And also getting together with there are some great programs in District 2, youth programs in District 2 and within the city. And I think getting together with these institutions and find out what the void is and pinpointing on that and trying to see and collectively hear out what the issues are. But more importantly, I think we need to have our youth at the table, and we have to create seats for them so they can share their views and what the issues are. And then we can kind of prioritize and build from there. But definitely we need to have the youth at the table. And if need to be, we have to create more seats to have the inputs from them. And it comes to the budgeting, and it's literally the responsible of us, the elected officials, to create from the current budget a percentage of that we're going to spend on our youth, the same way that there's other entities that we have to spend. Our youth has to be a priority and needs to be up on that list before we can say we have money that we can spend on other activities.
All right. And let's talk a little bit more about the coronavirus. I mentioned the city received $89 million in federal coronavirus stimulus money. The council allocated that to a variety of initiatives: housing, homelessness, small business recovery, workforce training, youth programs, tourism, and the arts. It's possible there is still going to be some money left that hasn't yet been spent, meaning the council will choose some additional items to fund this month. If that's the case, what programs or services should the council choose to fund? Mai, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, when COVID hit, Councilwoman Katie Valenzuela and I did 2 separate surveys, and one of the top issues that I heard from the community was rental and mortgage assistance. And that has to be something that we have to continue to keep our eyes on, because if we don't, I feel like it's something easy to just ignore, right? I appreciate the city's, work around supporting small businesses, the arts. That's great. There's also initiative to make sure that we ensure that families are connected, right? The digital equity piece is really important. That was also something that came up, and the city did respond to that. But it goes back to the rental and mortgage assistance. That's something that we have to stay laser focused on. We know that housing is incredibly important. And if folks are living on the street, we know that the lifespan is shorter. Right. And so, for the remaining funding, because I also know with COVID dollars, you have to spend it by a certain time. And so it's really important, those immediate needs, if we can get it out and support for residents that need that extra assistance, I think that's where we need to be spending our dollars. COVID dollars in particular.
Okay. Okay. Sean, what about you? What do you think if there's any CARES money left, what do you think that the council should spend it on?
I think we have to be, coming together as a group and really pay attention to the data that's out there to see where it's required for us to think and spend money. I mean, COVID-19 not only has physical health, issues, but it's causing a lot of mental issues too, especially between the youth and going from there. So we have to make sure that we have the right programs that we can assist the youth and any adults that have been challenged mentally with the scares of COVID. But I do agree with Council Member Mai that we have to also make sure that we're looking at our residents and create some kind of a rent accountability and support for the residents to make sure that due to COVID, they don't become homeless. So it's a very complex setting, but I do believe that we have to act extremely fast and share ideas and make sure that we can work together as a team to prioritize on where that money needs to go and what group that money should go to. And it should be done immediately rather than waiting another 2-3 months for this, because whatever this COVID has caused, we're just seeing that initial wave. And what worries me is that these waves are going to get more frequent and much bigger unless, again, as body of 8 plus the mayor body of 9, we can literally sit down and create a budget on how we need to spend this in its priority.
All right, and Katie, we'll move to you. If there is any CARES money left, what are your thoughts on where that should go?
I agree with the idea on emergency rent assistance. As I mentioned, 4 times the number of people applied as the current program can support. These are applications that are already in the door, that are already being vetted by SHRA. I mean, we could turn around and turn that money out quite quickly, since we're still unfortunately bound by the December deadline for spending that money. And that's sort of the general premise, right? Is like, let's ask the people what they need and really prioritize what they're saying. And on the hierarchy of needs, shelter is a very foundational issue. And the debt that people are accruing right now through the eviction moratorium is going to be insurmountable for too many families, and particularly families of color who we know are being disproportionately impacted and burdened through this crisis. So definitely think it should be going into emergency rent assistance.
Okay. I remember when we first got the CARES money, Katie, you were saying that the council should allocate more than it did for rental assistance. So it sounds like you're still advocating for that. All right. We've got a couple of minutes here before we pass it over to Alex for our next segment. We got a question about the Sacramento population. During the coronavirus, we've seen people moving from the Bay Area to Sacramento. As a result, rent prices in the Bay Area have actually dropped while rents in Sacramento have increased. Arthur asks, is population growth beneficial to Sacramento residents? And if so, how? Katie, we'll start with you on this one.
It's a natural byproduct of housing unsustainability and unaffordability in the Bay that folks are moving here. It's, great for talent, and we're getting new people who have new ideas, who are progressive, who want to make a difference, but it is putting a squeeze on the housing stock that was already pretty tight before they came. And folks from the Bay make more money than folks in Sacramento. I mean, our median income is still, I think, around $60,000 a year, and we can't afford $2,500 apartment rents in the new buildings downtown. So Sacramento really needs to take a much more aggressive stance on not just eviction protections, not just emergency assistance, but also how are we protecting tenants a little bit more. One of the first things I'm going to ask for on our first meeting is for a report back on the tenant protection program that was established by council resolution last year, so we can hear about how it's going, both from the city and from the tenants, and really potentially examine if there are more changes that need to be made, which I believe there are. As well as how do we keep building the stock of not just any housing, because right now there seems to be an unlimited supply of folks who can afford $3,000 a month for rent. We need to be really targeted on how are we building units that folks who live and work here can afford, folks on SSI, folks who are working at the Capitol, working at a state job, and simply need a unit that doesn't burden them with too high of a price.
All right. And Sean, we'll go to you. Any thoughts on this one about the population growth in Sacramento?
Well, it's obvious, right? I mean, the latest news has shown how the rents in cities like San Francisco have dropped tremendously because people are moving out. It's just not affordable. And yes, they are moving to Sacramento and some of the surrounding cities. Kind of following up with Councilmember Katie Valenzuela, that we just have to be more cautious. I think growth is great, but we need to have plans that will support this growth, and we need to be able to keep up with it. So whether that's whether it's with rent control, or, as I said, do we have this infrastructure for this growth? Are our streets wide enough to see this growth? Are schools equipped to see this growth? So I like growth. I think it's fantastic, but we also have to make sure that our foundation and our basis is ready for this growth as well.
All right. And Mai, we'll turn it to you. Any thoughts on this question about population growth?
The only thing I have to really just add is that Sacramento's success should be measured by how well our most vulnerable families are doing. And if we're not doing everything we can to protect our families to make sure they're not displaced, then that's an injustice. And so, population growth, I think, especially when folks are coming here from the Bay Area, I think that's great, right? There's always a conversation that Sacramento, there's a lot of great things happening in Sacramento, a lot of investment. But if our families can't afford to stay here and they get displaced, then we haven't really made sure that Sacramento is really what it promises to be. And so again, if we are to measure our success, it needs to be measured by the families that are hardest hit, the families that are struggling. And that means we got to do everything to make sure that they're protected, that they are able to stay in their homes, and that they don't get displaced.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we'll end it there. Thank you all so much for that discussion. We're going to move on now to the second segment of our event, a community discussion moderated by my colleague, Alex Hendricks, our excellent equity reporter. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Teresa and Katie, Mai, and Sean for that really engaging and thoughtful conversation. Like Teresa said, my name is Alex Hendricks. I'm a reporter in the Equity Lab, and I'll be moderating this next portion of our virtual town hall. Just a couple housekeeping notes again. If we have time, we'll try to get to some of the questions that are in the comments on Facebook, so please feel free to share them with us. This event is being recorded, so if you'd like to view this event at a later time, just head to the Sacramento Bee website, that's sacb.com, and we'll also share some links on our social media pages. And also, if you want to support this kind of journalism or more events like this, please consider subscribing to the Sacramento Bee. We're at sacb.com/subscribe, or you can donate to our Equity Lab. That's givebutter.com/the Sacramento Bee. And so I would love to build on that panel we just had with our new council member elects. We're going to expand our conversation with our community leaders. These are the folks who don't necessarily have a dais or a district, but are doing the work every day to make Sacramento a more equitable and inclusive place, and who have a wealth of insight to share with us. So let me welcome our speakers. Kendra Montgomery Block is Associate Director of Community and Economic Development at the Center at Sierra Health Foundation and leads the Black Child Legacy Campaign. Janice O'Malley-Galizio is on the Board of Directors for the nonprofit OCA Sacramento Asian Pacific American Advocates. Angela Chavez is the Director of Communications at Courage, California, and founder of Chicas Latinas de Sacramento, a volunteer cultivation and leadership nonprofit. And Malachi Amen is the Executive Director of the California Urban Partnership and led the creation of Sacramento's Cannabis Opportunity Reinvestment and Equity Program. These panelists have decades of experience advocating for social and racial justice and for economic investment in our underserved communities and neighborhoods across Sacramento. And so I'm excited to hear more from all of you. So first, I wanted to address the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the coronavirus pandemic and this new surge that we're seeing in coronavirus cases. Anyone can hop in to answer this question, but maybe I'll direct this first to Kendra. Tell us a little bit about the work you and your organization does and how it has changed since the pandemic.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alex, and everyone, just for the opportunity to participate and to really lift and be a voice for equity. At the center, the Sierra Health Foundation, we really are focused on both at a local level here in Sacramento, but even at a regional and statewide level. I mean, there's a couple of ways that we are really focused deeply in the Sacramento County area. One is that we actually lead and are what we consider to be kind of that high power intermediary that works between the Sacramento County Public Health Department and community-based organizations to really build a bridge around wraparound services for those vulnerable individuals and families that have been the most impacted by COVID. We're working with over 20 community-based organizations, east to west, north to south, and incredible folks that have really stepped up in the midst of dual pandemics to really serve these communities in incredible, remarkable ways, to really stand in the gap and wrap their arms around these families that have been really impacted by the inequities that COVID-19 really brings to bear on our systems. And so the SAC CoLab, when you are diagnosed with COVID, that goes to the county. The county then works with local nurses to be able to contact those families and those folks that have been impacted. We, at about 90 staff that again represent over 13 community-based organizations that have been trained and certified by the UCLA contact tracing certification process, have really been what we call health workers, contact tracers, resource coordinators, again, that contact those individuals, ask them how they're doing, how COVID is impacting them, and based on a survey of sorts, they can get their basic needs met when it comes to financial assistance, mental health and wellness, pregnancy support, other comorbidities that might be happening on and on and on. Food, groceries, hot meals. We really are standing in that gap. And again, could not do this without community partners and a system at public health that has been really leaning into building a strategy that creates an opportunity for families to be served. I think that what COVID-19 really has done is really shown a light on public health being unaware and unprepared to really deal with this level of pandemic. And we're really proud that the SACCO Lab and the work of the partners and the Center at Sierra Health Foundation has been able to step in and support.
Yeah, and Janice, Angela, I'd love to bring you two into this as well. We know, like Kendra was saying, COVID is disproportionately impacting low-income residents, people of color, financially, mentally, and physically. And we know that a lot of people, even before the pandemic, were struggling. So I'm wondering, what have been some of the challenges, some of the new challenges that you're seeing facing residents that you work with? And I guess sort of to add on to what Kendra was saying, what kind of support does local officials and everyday residents, what can they do to help people who are struggling the most right now? So Janice, we can start with you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. OCA Sacramento, we're dedicated to advancing the social, economic, and political supports for Asian Americans, both nationally and in Sacramento. And the way what we've heard within the community is the need for food security. Housing insecurity is a big issue. Making sure that there's access to basic health needs such as flu shots. We're concerned as we move forward with with vaccines for COVID that our communities are being outreached to, and that there's access to those vaccines in a way that our communities can reach them. And so we've been partnering and collaborating with other Asian American organizations in Sacramento to make sure that these solutions and deliverables are made. And as our panelists have said previously, the pandemic has shown obvious flaws in the system. And so we are working diligently with public officials to make sure that our communities are not forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that one of the criticisms early on directed towards the county was sort of an insufficient response to the uneven impacts of COVID, right? So we were seeing early on, especially very large outbreaks and spread, specifically in the Latino community. And the county was sort of slow to respond to that. Angela, I'd love to hop to you next. Based on what you're seeing during the pandemic, what are these new challenges that people are facing, and what kind of support or resources should local officials or even just everyday residents be giving?
Yeah, so I think the two hats that I wear are quite interesting. So one, with Courage California, we have both a C4 and a C3 and a couple different PACs. So we are highly political throughout the state. And one of the things that we do is we are working to make a more representative democracy here in California, and noting that as California goes, so does the nation. So we really work to unite progressives and provide tools and create a digital community. So we were already very digital, working more on the narrative and providing those tools to Californians to make sure they're prepared and educated and they know how to hold their representatives accountable. And I think right now with COVID, that accountability is as important as ever, at least, in a lot of our lifetimes right now, going into the COVID recovery and the economic recovery. It's, so important that people have the resources and the knowledge to be part of the planning, to understand the budget, to understand the inner workings from, how funding works coming down the line from federal to state to the counties to the cities. It's just very important to have an understanding about how your government works. And then going in with Chicas Latinas. So Chicas Latinas in Sacramento, we are a Latina volunteer cultivation nonprofit. So we've been around for like 11 years now. I want to say 11, going on 12, but we have a C3 and we really work to bring in Latina volunteers, noting that, volunteerism isn't culturally a thing that Latinos are known to do. But, working to get Latinos volunteering in the community, it really exposes them to the inner workings of nonprofits, community development, funding, and policy. So just kind of understanding how their community works, where the challenges are, where the needs are, and how we as people, can use our power of one to work in those spaces. So it really also creates these leadership skills. So, both these hats, although quite similar, they're also very different. And the one thing that I can say about Chicas Latinas is, right now we're not really able to work in the communities. We don't have that hands-on access that we once did. Normally we have our annual projects, that our most notable one being starting off on the right foot, which is an annual shoe drive. And we adopt a school and we provide new shoes for every student at that school. So last year we were able to give every child at Glenwood Elementary School with a new pair of shoes. But this year in 2020, we did our fundraiser, we got our shoes, and unfortunately Woodridge Elementary School, like our events had to be put on hold. Our distribution days put on hold. Kids are learning from home. We don't have the same one-on-one interaction with the communities that we serve, whether it be the homeless population. We worked a lot with the Sacramento Children's Home. We worked a lot with WEAVE, so Women Escaping a Violent Environment. We're still kind of continuing conversations with them, because all of these nonprofits that serve people, we're all kind of figuring out how to be a virtual resource now when people need connection the most, when people need access the most. So access to whether it be services or just each other, and access to, the inner workings of government right now, especially local governments, because they are so crucial as we prepare for the COVID recovery. So, my two hats are a bit different than most people on this panel, but I think having access and understanding what recovery is going to look like is crucial for all of our communities in Sacramento.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved what you're saying a little bit about civic engagement and how that's changing or has changed over the last few months. It's a good segue into sort of the next topic I kind of want to touch on, which is our most recent election. So both Measure A, which was that strong mayor equity proposal, and Measure C, that citizen initiative for stricter rent control, they both failed in November, but the city was deeply divided in the vote. Many in Meadowview, for example, voted for strong mayor and equity reforms, and most in Oak Park and Midtown voted for stricter rent control. So Malachi, I wanted to turn this to you, given your city experience. What do you think these voting patterns across Sacramento's differing neighborhoods reflects?
Well, thank you, Alex. It's great to be on with everybody. I think what it reflects is that we are dealing with a need to repair many of the scars that, can you guys hear me okay? I hope you can hear me okay. I'm hearing a lot of feedback. But we have a need to deal with the scars of racial wealth gaps, police violence, of needing to address the violence prevention activities and provide resources for those activities in our communities. We have, at the California Urban Partnership, been focusing in our lane on doing the research, educating the community about the policies that are under consideration, and organizing community action, not the least of which has been around opening up a $4 billion regional industry cluster in the cannabis space. And so we really need to, I think, expand as a city. And we've seen that need to expand as a city on economic development, on inclusive economic development, particularly in light of a pandemic. This pandemic has not just been about physical health, but it's also been about, what our economic health actually looks like. And so during the recent elections, whether we're talking about the strong mayor or rent control, what we saw was a need to really focus on how the city engages the community in developing solutions and not ignoring the community. We saw the problems that happen when our elected officials don't follow the lead of the community in terms of collective impact. And when we talk about collective impact, we're talking about, you know, getting everyone on the same page with respect to a shared agenda, you know, how we understand the process of measuring our results, and then having ongoing communication and building trust, and having really a strong system of backbone support that supports the community, and not just ignore the community, but really follow their lead. We saw, I think, a need for the city to pay attention to having an economic recovery that looks at an analysis of not just what is happening now, what exists in our current employer base and in our current tax base. We saw a need to have the city really center communities of color and help them in their small business and their affordable housing needs, so that those communities are a part of the economic recovery and not just a second thought afterwards. We saw so many of the background developments just be a wound that has not had a chance to heal. And we could go on and on with the city in terms of, you know, the airport, the King's Arena, the convention center, memorial auditorium, rehabilitation projects. These are multi-billion-dollar projects that have had less than 0.5% of entrepreneurs just on those projects, when we're 14% of the population. So, you know, we really need to have more intentionality around how the city pays attention to communities of color, and begin to do a racial and gender equity analysis as it does its policy making, as it considers what's happening in a budget. And I think this last election really pointed us to the need to pay serious attention to this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that thing you were saying about intentionality, I think really resonates with a lot of people. You know, just to bring a little context in, you know, the city has recently defined and broadened its understanding of public safety in the city code after another summer of protests against police brutality. And Sacramento County has also recently declared racism as a public health crisis. And what you were sort of mentioning, Malachi, and also some of our panelists, our council member elects had mentioned, you know, there is real traction among officials in both Sacramento County and the city of Sacramento who are interested in participatory budgeting, which would mean having more involvement from residents in deciding where money is spent. I think, you know, for many people this summer, and like you said, Malachi, this election has really further crystallized the need for change of the status quo in our community. And so for all of you, I'd like to ask, but we can start with Kendra. I'd love to get your sort of initial thoughts on these changes. You all have been leaders in this field. So I ask, you know, what are sort of the defining equity issues facing Sacramento? And you know, we're sort of a solutions-oriented lab, so I want to ask, you know, what are some of the programs and policies and assistance that we know actually work to address longstanding disparities?
Right. And so I think it's an excellent question. And when I really think about that question, it goes back to kind of what actually the power and title of this panel actually is. And that is a new direction for Sacramento leadership that really is setting a vision around what is the Sacramento that we all want to live in? And I think it's a really important question as we begin to answer your question. There's a short parable that we call the story of the downstreamers, and it just 20 seconds, I can tell this story. You know, you go to lunch with your friend and you are picnicking on the side of the riverbank, and you hear that there's a child in the river, and you jump off, you get a child, and as soon as you get that child back up on the riverbank, and okay, you find that there's another child in the river, and you go, and this is something that you and your friend are doing all afternoon, just really pulling children out of the river. And your friend says, hey, you know what? I'm going to go figure out what's going on upriver so we can really deal with the problem of why these kids are actually in the river. And I believe that there are ways that we can start to think about solving our problems and not just being a reactive Sacramento, but being a proactive Sacramento that really says what is going on upstream. How can we solve these problems and not consistently be in a pandemic or reactionary, that we can actually be prepared to deal and strategize collectively around what are the systemic inequities that our communities are facing. And truly, the Black Child Legacy Campaign stands out. It was mentioned in the Board of Supervisor resolution as a way to bring in what collective action looks like and how we can begin to use data to share ownership on the problems and create a strategy that really solves them along the way with people and community involved in that. And that is how I think we should be able to cast a vision, start thinking of an upstream, a safety net strategy that really includes a Sacramento for all. I believe in what Malachi and the team is saying here on the panel, that we cannot be just stuck and not understanding how the economic justice issues as well as the public health strategies are coupled in creating a better, stronger strategy for Sacramento. I also believe truly that it's not just about what we say here on the panel, but it's also leadership is really about what you're able to do in your actions. And so I really encourage us as we move from this to strategize together and to really transform systems through our actions and an upstream approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who don't know, who are joining us, you know, the Black Child Legacy Campaign started a few years ago with the goal of reducing preventable early deaths among African American children by 2020, and they had met and exceeded their goal of reducing those early deaths. And that really just came from a lot of goodwill and a lot of hard work from many nonprofits and also investment from the county as well.
Yeah.
I'd love to jump maybe to Janice. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what you think are the, you know, programs and policies and the assistance that we know work to address longstanding disparities?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to define one singular equity issue, right? When it comes to looking at the economic recovery and recovery from the pandemic, you know, certainly, you know, income inequality is a big issue for many Sacramentans and nationwide, right? And some of the programs that we've seen work, obviously looking at evidence-based data is really important when it comes to, you know, trying to fix the system, but, you know, representation matters. You know, having Katie Valenzuela, Mai Vang, and Loloee elected into office is one part of the process. Having our elected officials then coming to the community and understanding what the needs are is part of the process. You know, having access to grants is an important part of a process to make sure that CBOs, community-based organizations can really get in touch with the community. And then after identifying the needs, then how are they accessed and are they available in language for folks to access?
You are absolutely. I think you touched on some really interesting things. I know there are a lot of nonprofits in Sacramento that are doing really good work, but the thing they need is more resources and more financial support. And then the other thing you touched on, which is language. I know that language barriers are a real hindrance for people to accessing important things like whether they get their meals and do they get them regularly. I wanted to jump to Angela. For you, what feels like some of the defining equity issues in Sacramento, and what do we know actually works to break down some of those longstanding disparities?
Yeah, so I kind of want to go back to your earlier question regarding the two measures that you mentioned, Measure A and Measure C, and I think those, just are perfect examples of this city and the direction we need to go. So Measure A, of course, it had more support in Meadowview. I want to note that Measure A, the strong mayor proposal, also had there was equity pieces tied on to Measure A. So, we shouldn't be shocked that District 8, which is incredibly diverse, would support that measure. The equity pieces are pieces you can't ignore, especially, being in a diverse area. Looking at Measure C and how much backing it had from both, Midtown and Oak Park. Yes, those are both historical places that have had incredible rent increases, year after year. And they've all had some type of, they've been pushed out, right? So there's when the Kings Arena went up, and I have lived in both Midtown and I'm currently in Oak Park. When the Kings Arena went up, the first thought, in everybody's mind was, how are we going to afford these rents? And we saw that play out. And now in Oak Park, with the new Aggie Square being built, there's fear. How are we going to afford these rents? Are our communities going to get displaced again? So the fact that Measure C was so supported by these two communities, that made sense. And this all comes down to, for me, is just access to resources. They're not equal throughout Sacramento. If you look at Sacramento and the demographics, the data will show you exactly, where and why certain things were supported. And it's clear across the board that different areas have different issues, different accesses to resources, and that in different ways, ability to feel safe is a luxury in some ways. For Midtown and Oak Park, that ability to feel safe is the ability to know that they're going to have a home to live in, next week, a month from now, a year from now, if they're going to be able to afford those rents or if they're going to get displaced. So, across the board, when I think of, COVID recovery and how we're moving in Sacramento, for me, it really is, are we thinking in an inclusive way? Are we thinking racially inclusive? Are we looking at every piece of Sacramento's budget in a racially inclusive way? Because, we can overcome COVID, we can work on the COVID recovery, we can work on our economic recovery. But if the economic recovery doesn't help, in every space in our community, then is it really a recovery? If it doesn't reach certain communities, is it really a recovery? So just, looking at the data and really finding how to reach these communities and serve them correctly, I think is going to be so important, and not just put that bandage on it, not just, throw money at things. And, one of the examples for me comes to the police departments and, the fire departments, and just the huge budgets both these departments have. How can we look at that and reimagine it and put it back in the communities in ways that will actually serve and help and be racially inclusive and help lift up every community in the ways that they need to be helped? So, when I think of Sacramento's future and city planning, I think we really have to look at it from a more inclusive lens than we've ever looked at it before.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the thing you said about not just throwing money at a problem. Malachi, I wanted to bring this to you. You know, you've had experience building, you know, specific programs with an eye towards equity and inclusion. I'm wondering, you know, are there specific policies or programs that you think the city really needs to engage with over the next few months? Yeah.
Oh, most definitely. You know, one of the things that we know is that it will take over 200 years to close the racial wealth gap. And that's just not a time period that we have to endure in the city of Sacramento, again, if we are intentional about closing those wealth gaps. And so we can be looking at how to combine data with the relationships and the resources that are necessary to leverage existing opportunities around business retention, around attraction, and how we actually help those communities that have been down in the trenches and in the ditches for far too long. And we see, for example, 2 years ago, about $6 million coming into city coffers related to marijuana taxes. Now the city is receiving around $12 million a year for those revenues that come from about $300 million in annual economic output that's put out by our city's cannabis dispensaries. And so to say that we're not going to be intentional and pour more of those dollars back into the communities that have been disproportionately harmed by weed is saying that we're going to rape them and leave them in poverty. And that's just not the kind of outcome that we should have. We also have tremendous opportunities in the food and agriculture space, in the construction industry sector, in the technology sector. As we discussed earlier and pointed out, we have a lot of tech sector activity coming into the city of Sacramento. Unfortunately, one of the outcomes is that it's raising our rents. You know, but maybe what we should be looking at in this age of commuting from home is how we reuse and repurpose any of these vacant commercial office buildings that are just sitting around as people are on the streets and homeless and about to get thrown out on the streets if they currently have housing. These are ideas, I think, that will require a bold vision. It will require courage. It will definitely require the community's continued leadership on these issues, and it will require a city active leadership that listens, actually really listens to those communities. And so, you know, the solutions run the gamut. We have great opportunities in the city of Sacramento to do social enterprises and to do that in a way that increases the economic output of the city. And that's what we have to be super focused on. We have to have the courage. We have to plan, manage, and measure our success to make all of these things happen. And we have to do it with racial equity at the center. Otherwise, you know, the injustice and the climate for growth, it will never reach its fullest potential. But we do know that we have incredible potential, and we've made some progress in the city of Sacramento. But you know, we need to make sure that we're opening up the doors.
Absolutely. And what a great note to end on. I apologize. We have to end it there because this has been really, really an interesting conversation for me. And I hope people watching have also enjoyed it as much as I have. This has been really insightful. And I wanted to thank you all and also our council member elects for making time to talk to us today. I also want to thank everyone at the Bee for who helped put this event on. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We really appreciate it. So that's the end of today's event. Again, if you're interested in supporting events and journalism like this, please consider subscribing to the Bee at sacbee.com/subscribe. You can also donate directly to the Equity Lab. That's givebutter.com/the Sacramento Bee. And thank you again, and I hope you all stay happy and healthy this holiday season.